Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is The Sunday Show on Hromadske International, the only primetime TV program explaining the Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I am Natalia Humenyuk. And we are back with the new season of The Sunday Show, so that's what we have tonight for you. Parliament passes the controversial law on occupied territories. What it means for Ukraine. We talk with Ukrainians formerly held prisoners by Russia-led separatists. What does the Czech government's resignation mean for the Eastern European country? What can we expect from Russia's presidential elections in March? This week, Ukraine's parliament passes a new law on the occupied territories. The law aims to guide state policy regarding parts of Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which are currently under control of Russia-led separatists. The law has yet to be signed by the President Poroshenko, but he has already celebrated it. While the new regulations have not yet been without controversies, MPs and human rights activists worry that the law grants virtually unlimited power to the military and that some of its provisions remain extremely vague. We are joined in this studio by the Ukrainian MP from Batkivshchina party, Oleksiy Ryabchyn, who voted for the law, and as well Vyacheslav Likhachev, a coordinator at Vostok-SOS, which is a volunteer human rights group which also provides the legal help for the people affected by the conflict. But before we go to the discussion, I'll also present what is in this law. So that's what we can see in the graphic, the most important things. First of all, the law declares Russia as an aggressor state. It declares separatist-held territories to be temporarily occupied. It places legal responsibility on Russia, although there are questions about how it will function and how it might affect and free Ukraine of legal responsibilities to its citizens. Also, there is no longer ATO, that's what we have, no anti-terrorist operation, as it had been relabeled as resisting Russian aggression. That's what we have. Also, our next slide should show that joint operational headquarters should be replaced by the ATO. They are replacing ATO headquarters, which means that the military will now be in control instead of the security service of Ukraine. Also, there are new terms, combat areas and security zones, bordering military actions, and military and security forces get more power in these zones. As well, the non-military and security forces need permission to be there. So these are the basic things which we know. As well, what we know that at the same time, Russian MFA had already labeled the law counterproductive, quote, as it allegedly about military action, not about reintegration. Yet still there are many questions remaining. First of all, how all the things will change the life of the Ukrainians and the people in the conflict area. Oleksiy, the first probably question to you. So you voted for that law, so really just explain us why, with all the probably questions which are remaining.
Thank you very much, dear people. First, I would like to mention that I'm also from Donbas, so for me it was a very personal, thing to vote or not to vote for this law. And some small changes to your infographics. We didn't cancel the ATO terminology. If President will sign it, it will not automatically shift from one regime to another. Moreover, it could coexist together, ATO and this new term that we entered. This like a small let's say amendment to your infographics. Honestly saying, I was really doubting about voting or not for this law, and for me it was a huge compromise with myself personally, because for me it's 70% of in this law is really good, and 30% of this law is not yet not really good. We call it zrada, you know, in Ukrainian. So
Like the treason.
yeah, a bit of this and more, like about the violation of the human right or possible violation of the human right if this law will be, you know, not respected as the way it is. So for me, it was the biggest compromise, but it was only one amendment among all this, like more than 700 that were named in the parliament was voted, and it was my amendment. So for me, it was, you know, a moral obligation also to vote for this law. So we were able to, let's say, to eliminate almost all zradas, you know, from it. Not yet all, but like this for me was a biggest compromise. So I voted yes as 280 others members of parliament.
Vyacheslav, so what are the main concerns? Because there are the vague things and what could be misused. So what you would like to, and if are the chances to improve?
First of all, as a colleague of mine from the parliament, we are not against the law in general. We agree that in its political part that it makes sense to call the things by their own names, to call the aggression as an aggression, and to remove the counter-terroristic operation which has a not very strong legal basis to something with more strong background. And I agree that counter-terroristic operation has not cancelled yet because it had begun by an order of the president, not by the law, and so it is another order of the president need to be to cancel it. It hasn't cancelled yet automatically. But we have some worries about details of the legislation. And first of all, from the point of view of human rights, first of all, from the point of view of humanitarian situation, because as it was mentioned in the infographics, the security service and militaries in general have now more power to use weapons and to provide some actions which, from their point of view, are actions counter Russian aggressions, not only in a battle zone and not only in secure zone, but all over the country. We had not strong definition of what secure zone will be and what will be the territory of secure zone, but we have no new order of permission, new ideas about permissions to work in this zone. If now to work in counter-terroristic operation zone, only journalists need to have official permissions. Now, according to this legislation, humanitarian organizations also and any other organizations need to have a special official permission, and it will be difficult for us and for other organizations, possibly, potentially, to work in this zone. And it is also some, we worry about freedom of movement for people from non-controlled territory, from the occupied territory, because till now they had to make permission to cross the front line via electronic form by Secret Service. It is not clear enough how it will be now, and it is not clear enough if this permission will be enough for them to be in a secure zone. So we're afraid that the links with the people in the occupied territories will not be stronger after this law, but will be weaker. And it is not very good news about the new situation.
Oleksiy, it had taken some time to work on the law, and there was, I would say, there was a discussion in principle, but a lot of details were not really discussed. We still don't have the final text on the official webpage of the Ukrainian parliament. So really, in particular, what you would answer on those details, you know, that there are still so many gaps and the things which could be misused, you know, it more or less declares the state of the war, but the other counteraction which should protect the civilian population are not really there, or should be later discussed or decided by the military without clear concept on what principle they will do that.
I completely agree with you, and this was my mainly moral problem of voting or not for this, because we were working with the Vostok-SOS, with many other people, with the Red Cross International, that they give us some of their amendments, and we're trying to advocate for them. And honestly saying, in the committee, we had an opportunity to present them, and thanks to the members of the committee, they agreed to several of the amendments. But for example, like today we had a tragical incident in Alenivka where a civilian, one was dead and another was wounded because of the attacks on the bus. And the question is whether the new chief in command on this joint operation headquarters has the right to stop people moving across this border. The answer is definitely yes. He should stop movement because of the accident. But the question is whether it will be misused. If, for example, he decided to do it for a week, for a month, and like this is the question that we need to answer further. And I hope with the help of the human rights organization, we will be able to, to control the military for not misusing the law.
So how it would be, tackled, that issue, that those details are not there? What are you gonna to do? What could be done? And as well, for me, the second question is really this one on the responsibility of Russia. There is, in Ukraine, there is little doubt that, the war had been started by Russia, but in the end, to some cases, as for instance, there are the people living on the government-controlled territories, there is something happened to them. What is the legal responsibility of the Ukrainian state in front of the Ukrainian citizens if we know that, Russia is not cooperative? Vyacheslav?
First of all, it is not the first law in our legislation already exists, and the statement that Russia is aggression and the territory are occupied. And we need to understand very clear that this political statement has no serious basis for the international law. If we in our parliament decided that the Russia is the aggression, it doesn't mean that the Russia will agree, that the international society will agree. According to the international legal system, we need to go through the international organizations, we need to go through the International Criminal Court to prove the responsibility of Russia from the aggression from the very beginning, to prove the responsibility of Russia for the contemporary situation and for the population on an occupied territory. But till now, all the population on occupied territory, they are Ukrainian citizens. And the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian president has a responsibility for their rights of movement and other human rights. So this political statement is, as for me, totally right, but it doesn't mean that the legal situation and the situation of responsibility from the point of view of international society will be changed automatically after this law.
Just to add to this, it's like with the MH17, the Boeing that was hit by the pro-Russian forces. Everybody knew that they hit by the Russian book. So it is like a genuine understanding, but the legal argument is still ongoing on. So we need the legal argument to have proven facts, and then Russia will not have any chances to avoid it. The same is here. We know that there are Russians, but we need help also from the civil society, from international community to prove it, and for people to sue Russia in court.
Let me very practical. If I imagine if a person lives in the frontline zone and has the house damaged, allegedly by the Ukrainian military, there is the things are there. You can't wait for Russia in the end pay those money, maybe in decades, but not now. So really, what are, according to this law, the obligation of the Ukrainian state in front of their own citizens?
Okay. It's like I will try to say it very briefly. So according to the ATO, if Ukrainian state conducts the anti-terroristic operation, if something is damaged, it should be repaid by the Ukrainian state. According to this law, it's now obligation of Russia to compensate. Of course, Russia said we are not aggressor, but it was my amendment that passed through the parliament that if a person who lost their house, lost their health, or have some moral damage they are able to sue Russia in Ukrainian court without paying the court fee, which is according, I don't know, $300, $500, just to put the papers on court. Then it will be, of course, a procedure. But let me remind you that Yanukovych took, for example, $3 billion from Russia, and the Ukrainian state is sued by the Russia into the international court, in the court of London, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know, but since, like, I guess we need to repay this money, but we won't pay it to Russia. We will pay it to those people who sue Russia, and it will consider as the Russian money paid to the Ukrainian citizen by the Ukrainian state.
So, Vyacheslav, do you see the legal framework for the Ukrainian citizens to get their compensation or any kind of defense and security because of this law? Do you see this legal mechanism? Is it understandable for the people?
I'm not sure that it is understandable not only for the people but also for the professionals, for the lawyers. I think that the only real way is European Court for Human Rights and some procedure of international courts, and it is a long distance, but I'm not sure that there is another way according to the contemporary situation.
So really, there wasn't any case to really, not to rush, because the point of that, somebody would say it's already a long time since all those things should be, implemented, voted. It's the 4th year of the war we will have this year already. At the same time, there are some details which are just lacking. So there is no, it's hard to understand why there was a need to really do that without that detailed discussion. Was it enough discussion, do you think, prior to the voting?
I doubt that there are any of kind of discussion, the public discussion on the majority of the laws that Rada implement, because we go everything on a fast track, on a fast procedure without a proper discussion, without white papers, green books, etc. So, but we have a hybrid war situation, so we are trying to put a hybrid response on it. I'm not really I'm a, let's say, scientist by my background. I like to discuss, to examine, to research more, and to do this kind of fast situation for me is not the not my business as usual. But this is the reality. If we will not respond quickly enough, we will be overplayed by Russia. So definitely this law has lots of disadvantages, and my amendments and amendments of my colleagues from Batkivshina, from Samopomich, from many other, were targeting these kind of problems. Unfortunately, they were not supported by the coalition, and this is a kind of law, compromise law. We were able to delete all the amendments regarding the Minsk, because we were not willing to put the Minsk to the Ukrainian legislation, but they put some other, and this was a compromise.
That is also the question. Maybe Vyacheslav would start and you will go on. You would say, as because you argued for that there won't be the mentioning of the Minsk process. Do you think is really helpful, and what are your thoughts?
I think that there are two parallel situations, two parallel contexts of the Minsk agreements and our talks with Russia and our internal political situation. And this law seems to me to be as a political statement for our internal situation. And I am not sure that it will be very serious changes in process of Minsk talks about concrete questions like freedom of our prisoners in occupied territories and so on. So it seems to me that the political statement in this law will not change situation with our talks around Minsk agreements.
Why you were so much against that?
Let me put it that way for our international friends. According to all the consultations that we did with the embassies of, let's say, J7 embassies, their first analysis said this law is not contradicting the current Minsk process. This is clear, this sounds very clear for us. So some of the countries from, let's put it that way, from Normandy format, they regret that we excluded Minsk. Some of the countries also who are participating in the negotiation said they understand and no problem with this. But it's my perception that, and my political position, that like Minsk is like it's not an agreement. It's some kind of a like it's not a legal basis for the Ukraine. So we didn't.
At the same time, yeah, but the
It was a will of
Minsk
president.
had passed through the Security Council in the UN, which has
Well,
a high authority in
Well,
this
why we should include it into the Ukrainian legal basis? Minsk is a process. Like somebody will say that like Minsk is like a riding on a dead horse, but this is the only horse that we have. Yes, it's great that we have a platform for discussion, but where is the result of the Minsk? Maybe we need to think about some other mechanism of going further. For example, the President Trump proposed, let's move the platform from Minsk to, I don't know, Vienna or Almaty. I don't know whether it helped or not, but people are trying to find a new breath for this negotiation because they didn't lead to the solving of this crisis, unfortunately.
Coming back to the effect of the law on the citizens, so really, to sum up it all, it's really increased the power of the president, and sometimes there are the question that if he really has the solid legal ground for that, and also the authority and power of the military and security units. So if you would finalize, what are the other things to watch out and to be clarified besides these security zones which we already discussed?
Actually, again, we are not totally against those parts of the law also. There were some corrections which were made during the vote which make a situation a little bit better from the humanitarian point of view also. For example, it was the point about recognition of the official documents about the childbirth and about the death of people from the DNR, LNR, so-called separatistic republic to the Ukrainian territory, because till now people need to go through the court to recognize their document about the birth of new child, for example, to give him her or Ukrainian citizen. So there were some corrections that made situation a little bit better. But what we are worrying about is more about that we don't understand clear how the situation will change, because a lot of subjects are not wrote in this law very in a concrete terms, and the security zone is an example, and order of the making permission to work to present in the security zone. Also, we still haven't seen, as far as you said, the final official text of the law, and we of course don't know how it will be worked in practice.
My final for Oleksiy, I would ask to be brief. It's not the law on deoccupation and reintegration, but there is also the questions, what it really does for that, and why it's not there.
Yeah, I will put it very clear. This is not a law about the reintegration. It more, speculated by the presidential team to say that the president is caring about this territory, so it's like trying to put this narrative. It's not the law about the deoccupation, because nothing about some military action going further. It's more speculated on people from, from more hawkish position to say, like, to sound more, militaristic. It's not the law about the occupied territory, because we are not putting our legislation there. You need to, the branding this law about the peculiarities of the state policy, how to establish a sovereignty.
My question would be really what it gives to the people who probably reside on the government not controlled territories, or it's not really that much about them?
It's not really that much, unfortunately, about this, but like my signal to the people who are watching us, like there are a lot of people in the parliament, in the government, and I hope in the presidential administration that care about you and willing you to return to the Ukraine, to the Ukrainian blue and yellow color. So, and we are doing all of we can to to establish this. And this law is definitely not about cutting you and give you back to Russia. So we are fighting for you, and this law is helping us to fight back for you, to have Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea in a sovereign Ukraine. And tomorrow will be a big celebration as the date of Sobornost, and I think it's very symbolical for us.
So thanks for explanation. It's a complex topic, but I hope we managed to explain it to the extent it's possible at this stage. So it's exactly this law might have effect on the heroes of our next story. A small eastern town of Marinka is just bordering with separatist-controlled Donetsk. It's not for the war. You could basically walk there. When fighting broke out 4 years ago, many residents were forced to flee their homes. Today, the Ukrainian military is stationed there, leaving dozens of families without housing. Now residents are suing the state for damages, and even if they were willing to accept a small sum of money as compensation, there is no legal mechanism for that.
In the evening, shooting starts in Marinka. The shelling comes from the Russia-led separatists. From the centre of Marinka to the Petrovsky district of Donetsk, it's half an hour by foot. This beige building in front of the slag heap is part of the Zeleny High street. Before the war, it was considered a prestigious part of the Marinka. Since 2014, it has been constantly under fire. There is almost nothing left of the houses. Between Zeleny High and the self-proclaimed DNR, there are only 500 metres of no man's land. For the Ukrainian military, this is already the front line. The road leading to Zeleny High starts after that gas station. The Ukrainian military checkpoint is the last place you can freely drive up to. They don't let you go any further.
First they took this street because there was a hospital here, and then our street.
Before this, 57 families lived in Zeleny High. For the 4th year now, they're living with relatives or renting apartments in neighbouring cities. Before the war, there was an orphanage in Zeleny High, where all the residents of the micro-district worked. Vadim Misyura is one of them. He is currently renting an apartment in Kurakhove, 20 kilometres from Marinka.
You see, considering that we worked in a school for orphans, I personally didn't have time to follow everything that was happening. Because it was May, the end of the school year. We noticed the checkpoints appeared in the city. But again, Zeleny High is separated from the rest of Marinka. It's like a little town.
He remembers how the war began in Marinka. In the summer of 2014, fierce fighting broke out in Marinka. Most of the city came under the control of the Ukrainian military, but Zeleny High Street remained a buffer zone between the Ukrainian military and separatist checkpoints. Most of the residents left Zeleny High, but they continued to visit their homes.
There's no automobile access to this territory. The roads are all blocked. There are only small trails, and people use these small paths to get to their homes during the daytime by bike. This is how it usually happened. People called each other up. 5 or 6 families formed a group. They take the path in the daytime and stay there until around 3-4 p.m. in the summer. They patch something up, repair a roof, cover up cracked glass.
In June 2015, fighting started in Marinka again. The town was recaptured from the separatists. Ukrainian soldiers were stationed on Zeleny High Street. Residents were banned from entering the territory.
There was already a checkpoint standing there, and we were told that entry is prohibited. You can't go there.
Since then, residents have begun to appeal to different authorities, asking them to permit them entry to their homes. In August 2015, they were taken there under the control of a civil military cooperation group. They are called CIMIC. They are an intermediary between military forces on the front and civilians.
There were no household appliances. Many photos were left behind, personal belongings, memorabilia. Well, people lived there. Nobody had moved out.
The door was broken, shot through to the point, it didn't open. The furniture was ruined. They opened the closet, broke it. Not everything was in its place. For the first time, then they came and most everything was stolen.
The last time people were able to get into their homes was in the beginning of 2016. After that, the authorities closed off access. The local civil military admission explains that they did this for the safety of the residents.
For example, in 2016, when we went there, fairly serious shelling started, and the servicemen with whom we visited the area were basically defending people with their bodies. It just so happens that this area, Zeleny Hai, is located on the line of demarcation, as is the active fighting, which unfortunately is still going on there. It's happening practically along the entire line in Marinka, but the most aggressive fighting is there.
Residents say that, most of all, they want to return home, but this is impossible. Therefore, they have decided to sue the state for the loss of their housing and property as a result of the military action. Close to 30 cases have already been brought to court. The defendants in these cases are the Ukrainian Cabinet of Ministers, the State Treasury and the Ministry of Defence. Hromadske asked the defendants to comment on these claims. We did not receive an answer in time, but we are awaiting an official response, which we will disclose when we receive it. However, lawyers are certain that there is a chance they will win the cases, but there is no precedent for this in Ukraine, even though residents along the whole contact line face the same problem.
There are testimonies, there are before photos, there are after photos, that is, at least a small part of this we can be proved. But there is also another difficulty, we are also demanding moral compensation.
Yes, there really is a law on mobilization, but there is no implementation order. It is written that the state should compensate people, but who exactly is not mentioned. These costs are not covered in the budget. There is no martial law and no state of emergency. If we compare the practice of the European Court again, in the European Court there are lawsuits such as Cyprus against Turkey. That is, the citizens of Cyprus filed lawsuits, and there, because of the lack of access to their property, certain compensation was awarded. So if our courts apply the norms of the Constitution, the decision of the European Court of Human Rights, the norms of the European Convention, the law on mobilization, I believe that these claims can be successful.
The civil military administration in Marinka says that, until the war ends, there can be no talk of compensation. The local government assures that they are doing everything they can.
Whenever there was the opportunity to help, we helped them. Any materials that they needed from us, we provided. These are documents about the destruction, photographs, and so on. Compensation, unfortunately, will be possible only in the event that the anti-terrorist operation ends, according to the final provision of the law on the fight against terrorism.
Until recently, Vadim Misyura did not want to go to court. He considers himself a patriot of Ukraine and hoped that the state would still provide him with housing instead of ruins. Misyura says that he has no grievances with the army, but after 4 years of waiting, he is tired. He is currently preparing the documents for the lawsuit.
I will sue for damages. That is, I'm not going to sue the army because I understand why they are there. But I would like the state to help compensate me for the damage caused by the fighting and to help restart my life practically from scratch.
Just a few days before New Year, 73 Ukrainians imprisoned in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions were freed as the part of the prisoners' exchange with the Russia-led separatists. It was the only big prisoner swap for the last 2 years. There is very little information on the realities of life in the separatist control areas and prison conditions there, so the information we receive from former prisoners is extremely valuable. One of the freed Ukrainians is a prominent Donetsk-based Ukraine-based scholar of religious Igor Kozlovsky. Following the seizure of Donetsk in 2014, Kozlovsky chose to remain in Donetsk to look after his eldest son, who suffers from Down syndrome and is confined to a wheelchair. However, exactly 2 years ago, the 63-year-old professor was arrested by representatives of the so-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic for his pro-Ukrainian views and spent nearly 2 years in rebel-held Donetsk's prison. His health deteriorated as a result of the dire conditions he was held in and the torture he was subjected to. We sat down with Igor Kozlovsky shortly after his release to talk about his difficult time behind bars in the DPR and his hopes for the future of Ukraine.
At first, I was at the State Security Ministry's basement, and those were the most difficult, horrible conditions. Then it got a little better. The first nice period was when I was in a little cell. There were some difficulties, but at least you could live there. Later, I was relocated to a place that was formerly used as death row in Soviet times. These days, they hold people with life sentences or those they want to torture in there. Those were very difficult conditions because the cells were extremely small and you could barely move inside them. You could either sit or lay down. There is a hole in the floor right next to you, which they call a toilet. It was very tough. The State Security Ministry is curated by the FSB. It's practically an open secret. Everyone knows about it. Even the local DPR administration cannot influence the State Security Ministry because the State Security Ministry comes to the FSB directly, and you can feel it. Any office you go in, you'll find portraits of Stalin, Putin, and then Zakharchenko. The moods are changing, of course. I had an opportunity to find this out from the ordinary prisoners who were detained for criminal cases and then sent onward to prison colonies. Just recently, they were on the outside. They have a feeling of futility. Everyone says that the region is not viable. Factories stop working. The majority of the mines don't operate anymore. People look for easy money. Everything that could have been stolen has already been stolen. And all the metal parts in the city have been looted. So what's next? How do we live? Those who have a stable job find their ways to survive. There are whole regions where people had industrial jobs. They worked in the factories, mines, and other establishments. So what is to be done? To leave, mostly to Russia. If they have relatives, they push them to move to Russia or to Ukraine. But of course, this is done with more caution. And then there are rumors that the people from Donetsk are not wanted in Ukraine, that if they go back, they will be pariahs there. They really believe this and pass these stories on to each other. These cases really do exist, but all people are different. Some are hot-tempered, we should understand that. But people see what they want to see. You can call it a show that's been acted out many times when they point a gun at you and say they're going to play Russian roulette and then spin the cylinder. Or when they just fire at you. There are many such cases. Some were tortured with electricity. That, of course, was horrible. The torturers knew that they just needed to extract a confession. Primitive and unprofessional. They have a task, and this task is very simple: to force charges upon people, extract a confession, and then they pass the case on to the investigator and then on to the court and so on. One thing is absolutely clear. We should never, and under no circumstances, give up our territories. It would be a terrible precedent. No way. It's our land, and that's clear-cut. It's not a subject for discussion, no matter what anyone wants or says. And it's not just a territory. It's also the people, our residents with Ukrainian passports, and their mindsets and opinions. Yes, they've been subject to the ideological propaganda of the so-called Russian world. We need to fight for these people, too. They are human beings. I've been told that part of the nation supports the resolution of the conflict by force, and another part wants dialogue, a peaceful resolution. As always, the truth is somewhere in the middle. We need both kinds of efforts. We need to strengthen the Ukrainian army to make it more powerful. It needs to be defensive in its nature. We don't want to attack, but it still requires us a lot of work. On the other hand, we need to use force. We need to stand by our borders and restore them. The other thing we need is for the powerful and healthy society to finally mature. As I said, they have different stances, but they should have one goal: the sovereignty and unity of Ukraine. We know that for Ukraine to develop and flourish, we need a civil society. The other thing is that I think our society lacks maturity, hence why there are polar tendencies. Why is there a need for a civil society in this case? To establish a connection with the people on the other side of the demarcation line. Many retain family and friendship ties with them. We just need to meet these people, to talk with them, to calmly explain our position. I always tell my students that in order to not get disappointed in people, we need to not make idols. I will not get disappointed in anyone simply because I love people the way they are. I love my country the way it is. Yes, Ukraine is corruption, and yes, there are many other problems, but we chose the right direction to move in, to the global society. In spiritual practices, there is this idea that the road is also the destination. What is enlightenment? Enlightenment is a process. It's when you walk in the tunnel, and as you walk, you see more and more light. We're still walking in this tunnel, but we're walking in the direction of the light, and demanding for all of the light to come at once is too big a demand. But should we still demand it? Yes, we should.
Hromadske has also been following the story of another recently freed Ukrainian prisoner, Oleksiy Ryabchyn. He was captured by separatists on February 9, 2015, while serving in the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donetsk region. His capture came just 1 week after the Battle of Debaltseve, when the car he was driving in Nell fell under shelling. Following his release, Ryabchyn was taken to the military hospital in Kiev to undergo rehabilitation treatment. Hromadske caught up with him there to discuss his day-to-day life in captivity and how he's adjusting to civilian life.
Ой, Саша! Саша!
Слава Україні!
Сину мій дорогий, дитину мою. Ну, конечно, всі хочуть одихнути.
Of course, everyone wants to relax. It's just at first we need to make the most of the medical treatment we get. Guys are being sent to Western Ukraine, maybe to Truskovets. It's okay, we need to distract ourselves, get used to civilian life. I got out and I was walking on the escalator. I looked around, and they were holding under my arm so I didn't fall. After all, I hadn't seen real sunlight in 1.5 years, only from behind bars. It's somehow unnatural. You wake up when the lock rattles and the food hatch opens. Then you stretch, work out, you walk around, you can go out, chat for a bit. Walks are carried out in 2 wards at a time, and you can chat quietly. Then you can do what you want. There were books. We all read the books and then swapped. My mom sent me out local newspapers. It was interesting to see what was happening in the country. The first person to actually bring us parcels was Volodymyr Ruban. That was before St. Nicholas's Day in 2016, the time when they released cyborg Taras Kolody. But before that, we lived like homeless people. We didn't see toothpaste or soap. Humanitarian organizations came. The Red Cross, for example. They started giving us butter, sugar. They gave us boiled eggs, and then we shared them out, and whoops, it disappeared, and we were eating pig food again. DPR Ombudsman Daria Morozova came to us and broached the topic. She said, "I've spoken to a fortune teller, quote-unquote. She whispered to me that I will soon have to release you." Soon went on for more than a year. She came to us occasionally and said, "They passed on letters from your relatives, but I did not take them. What? I'm a postwoman now, carrying your letters." And that's how she became known as Darka the postwoman. We watched the news, and on the weekends we watched some kinds of films. We also watched local news featuring the so-called deputy commander of the DPR army, who we used to call Grandfather Panas because he would tell fairy tales. When you get out of prison, these devils come to you. They give you a sheet of paper and they say, "Write that you were held in all right conditions, you were given medical help, and that you do not have any grievances."
Про це треба забути.
So for the full version of our reports and interviews, please go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua. Also go to Twitter, search Hromadske and the Hromadske International on Facebook. We are there 24/7 working for you, and I'll be back in a second. A political crisis is unfolding in Czechia as the country prepares for the second round of the presidential elections this month. Prime Minister Andrzej Babiš's government stepped down last week after losing a vote of confidence, partly because of the fraud charges faced by Babiš. But with incumbent president and Babiš supporter Miloš Zeman in the running to retain his seat, could the prime minister hang on to power? Hromadske spoke to Martin L., a Czech journalist and the world news editor at Hospodářské noviny, about what we can expect from the upcoming elections.
Prime Minister Babiš didn't negotiate with the other parties about the support of the government. He thought that this is the first attempt, and from the very beginning it was clear that no other parties will join in without great concessions, and because he's new in the politics in the sense that he behaves like the head of the company, which he was for a long time. So he is not willing or maybe able to negotiate with the others, and he wanted to show the others that he is the boss. So from the very beginning, it was clear that this attempt to create a government will fail. Under his leadership, his company, which is now in the trust fund, so officially he is not the owner, that this company misused or accepted money from the EU funds under the conditions which were fabricated, or to put it in the other words, that he made a big company small to be eligible for the funds, and then again he put this small company, after receiving the funds, back to the big company, which is according to some opinions, for example, opinion of the Olaf, which is the anti-fraud office of the European Union, which might be considered fraud. So, and then there is a possibility that those involved, there are 11 people investigated in this case in Czech Republic, that these 11 people could face jail up to maybe 10 years. So for him, it's a quite serious situation, but he refuses any blame. That he says there is no fraud and that he was not involved. There will be second round of the presidential elections next weekend. There is a possibility that Zeman will win. In that case, Zeman somehow has a kind of pact with Babiš that he will nominate him or his person to be prime minister and to try to negotiate with some other partners. Already there are signs that for the second round of the forming of the government, there might be some partners from the other parties willing to join Babiš, but if Babiš will not be prime minister. And there are signals that maybe Babiš is considering this option, even it's against his personal nature, because he is a CEO by nature and he wants to be in the driving seat, not in the back seat. But maybe this Olaf case and the fraud investigation will force him to reconsider this position. If there will be another winner of the elections, Mr. Drahoš, who is in the second round against Mr. Zeman, then Babiš has a much weaker position, because Mr. Drahoš said that he will really not nominate him as a prime minister if he is accused. So there will be much bigger pressure on Babiš somehow to step back and nominate somebody else for the prime minister's office. But nobody is putting doubt that the Babiš party, ANO, is the winner of elections and has a democratic mandate to govern. And nobody's against that. This is really, let's say, the question of a person who is under criminal investigation being prime minister, which sounds weird in the European Union. Maybe if Mr. Zeman will win as a president, there will be continuation of this, let's say, more pro-Russian course from the president, but definitely not from the Mr. Drahoš if he wins, and definitely the government will keep the position as it is and as it was in the last years. And as we are seeing now in the campaign, that the pro-Russian or suspiciously pro-Russian sources are supporting Mr. Zeman, are trying to dehonest Mr. Drahoš in the campaign. So we see there are clear Russian interests in play.
It's just 2 months left till Russia's presidential elections planned for March 18th. The date was chosen to symbolically mark the anniversary of the Crimean annexation. What does Russian campaign season look like? Current President Vladimir Putin is set to retain his post. In that case, by the end of his fourth term, he will have run Russia for roughly 23 years. Yet there are two candidates that could make this race a little less straightforward. And earlier today, my colleague Matthew Kupfer spoke with the Economist Moscow correspondent Noah Snyder to find out more.
Well, I think the least exciting or at least intriguing part of the the campaign is the election itself. Obviously, the results aren't in much doubt. Vladimir Putin's expected to win another term, which will give him another 6 years in office. The question is, for the Kremlin, first of all, how many people show up? So turnout is a big issue, and it's seen as a barometer of legitimacy, whether they're able to generate enough excitement, enough intrigue in this strange campaign itself to get people to actually come out to the polls. So there's several things that they've been doing to try and generate a bit more excitement around this election, which is more like a coronation. They've invited a series of candidates from the systemic opposition and others like Ksenia Sobchak, who seem to be operating at least with the agreement or the blessing of the Kremlin to suck up some of the opposition vote. We've seen Putin going out and doing a host of stunts, as he likes to do from time to time, a shirtless dip for Klishenia last week, and we've also seen attempts or reports of attempts to turn the election itself into sort of holiday atmosphere. So they're holding the vote on March 18th, which is of course the anniversary of the annexation of Crimea, Russia's official annexation of Crimea. There are reports that governors in different regions have been asked to try and get people out to the vote by creating a holiday-like atmosphere. So there's a whole bag of tricks in play, but the last thing that the campaign looks like is a real campaign. It's a scripted spectacle.
So let's talk for a moment about some of the other candidates. Ksenia Sobchak, when she announced her candidacy, it was a very big news story. Everybody was covering it. There was a lot of noise. What does it look like now?
Well, she's going about campaigning as if hers was a real campaign. So she's traveling to different cities. She's holding events. She's showing up on television, notably on state television, which again is a sign that there's at least some level of cooperation, if not collaboration with the powers that be. She's obviously said quite openly that hers is her campaign is not an attempt to win, that she doesn't expect to win, that her goal is not to win, but rather to, she says, provide an outlet for those who are against the other alternatives. Obviously, there's a lot of questions, unresolved questions about her true intentions, about what drove her decision to get into the campaign, and regardless of the answers to those unresolved questions, the fact is that she is playing a role, a sort of spoiler role, and detracting attention and potentially detracting support from Alexei Navalny, who is, of course, the most significant figure in this election season other than Putin himself, and significant in large part because he isn't being allowed onto the ballot. Well, Navalny's ability to bring younger people out to the streets at protests last year certainly got the Kremlin's attention. So we've seen the Kremlin also attempting to play to the youth vote. Navalny's role is less one of sort of electoral politics. His role, I think, is really a longer term force in Russian politics. And what we've seen him do in the course of this campaign, as it were, is build a national network of what he calls stabs or headquarters in cities across the country. He's used these networks of volunteers, of supporters, to generate large crowds, both at his appearances and also at the protests, which he's continuing to hold. So there will be another march next weekend on January 28th, which is expected to draw significant crowds. and I think he'll continue to push his agenda on the streets, because that's the only channel that they've really left open to him. Look, I wouldn't get too caught up in, frankly, in the various candidates, the various people who are being trotted out on stage to give this election the appearance of reality. What's an open secret to frankly everyone in Russia is that this isn't a competitive election. So which candidate the Communist Party puts out versus whether Zhirinovsky does this or that for LDPR, frankly, I don't think has a whole lot of meaning in the scope of things. What's important in this election is number one, again, the turnout, the extent to which apathy is reflected in Russian citizens' willingness to show up at the polls. Number two, the tension between the Kremlin and Navalny, and Navalny's ability to build a political movement, in part with the help of younger people that might have a future beyond this electoral cycle. And I think number three, frankly, the most important thing is what happens after this election. It's not who's standing on the stage when Putin gets crowned again. It's how Putin handles and how the Kremlin handles the coming term, which is a tricky one for a host of reasons, not least of which that constitutionally it's the last term he's entitled to, barring any changes to the constitution or barring attempts to wiggle his way out of the rules. So it creates a succession problem, which historically is always a difficult inflection point for Russian leaders, and it's one that Putin himself and the Kremlin don't seem to have resolved yet. So I would keep eyes on frankly what comes after the vote, rather than how the vote itself is constructed.
From the entire team of Hromadske International, thank you for watching. Go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua for the full version of our interviews and reports. Search at Hromadske on Twitter and Hromadske International on Facebook. There we are for you all the time, and we are here to explain Eastern Europe and Ukraine.